A single shot, a sudden, violent act. In just one instant, a leader is gone, and the entire course of history gets knocked off its tracks. It's a pretty terrifying idea, right? That one single moment can send ripples across centuries, shaping empires, nations, and even, well, some of our most personal traditions. So join me as we look at 3 assassinations that didn't just end a life, they completely redrew the map of the future. Thus always to tyrants. You know, these were the famous words shouted by the actor John Wilkes Booth right after he shot Abraham Lincoln in 1865. But here's the thing, Booth wasn't original. He was deliberately quoting a phrase that was tied to the assassins of Julius Caesar almost 2,000 years earlier. That is a truly chilling connection, a thread of political violence that stretches all the way across millennia.
And that really is the question, isn't it? It's not just about the attack itself. It's about the power vacuum that's left behind, the totally unintended consequences, the paths that history could have taken but didn't. How can the death of just one person completely derail the world they lived in? Well, let's find out. And we're going to start in ancient Rome. Okay, so our first stop takes us all the way back to 44 BC and a plot to kill Gaius Julius Caesar, the dictator of Rome. Caesar was, at the absolute height of his power. He was so influential that the Senate had actually named him dictator for life. But you know what they say? With great power comes great fear. And a conspiracy was brewing right in the heart of the Roman Senate. So despite all the famous warnings to beware the Ides of March, Caesar went to the Senate on March 15th anyway. And there he was surrounded. A senator named Servilius Casca lunged and struck the first blow. Caesar, shocked, apparently yelled, "Casca, you villain, what are you doing?" And yeah, forget Shakespeare's famous "it tu brute." Those were his real last words. At that moment, Casca yelled for help, and the rest of the assassins swarmed in. The chaos was immediate, and its consequences, they would be absolutely devastating. So why? What drove these men to do this? Well, it was a messy mix of motives. It was never just one thing. On the one hand, sure, you had the high-minded political fear that Caesar would tear down the Republic and crown himself king. Marcus Brutus, a man Caesar treated like a son, came from a family famous for hating tyrants. But on the other hand, there were some deeply personal grudges. Cassius was furious at Caesar for passing him over for a promotion, and another conspirator, Decimus Brutus, felt like Caesar's right-hand man, but was bitter that he was being overlooked in favor of Caesar's young great-nephew Octavian. And here is the great historical irony of it all. In their attempt to save the Roman Republic, to preserve its traditions, the conspirators achieved the exact opposite. Caesar's death didn't restore anything. It sparked a brutal civil war that completely destroyed the very republic they fought to save. And from the ashes of that war rose the Roman Empire, ruled by the very heir they resented, Octavian, who would become the Emperor Augustus. So think about that. Their attempt to prevent a king directly led to the creation of an emperor. All right, let's jump forward nearly 2,000 years to Washington, D.C. in 1865. The American Civil War is just about over, and another assassination is about to completely change a nation's path forward, derailing a vision for unity and healing before it even had a chance to start. You know, the scene itself is almost theatrical, which kind of makes a dark sort of sense, since the assassin, John Wilkes Booth, was one of the most famous actors of his day. He knew the play, Our American Cousin, like the back of his hand. He waited for one specific line that he knew would get a huge laugh from the audience, and he used that sound to muffle the crack of his pistol. After shooting Lincoln, he dramatically leaped from the box to the stage below, shattering his leg in the process, shouted "Sic Semper Tyrannis," and then limped off to a getaway horse. It was a perfectly planned, terribly public murder.
For 12 days, John Wilkes Booth was the most wanted man in America. One of the largest manhunts in the nation's history was underway. He and a co-conspirator fled into Virginia, hoping to find friendly faces sympathetic to the Confederate cause. But the Union Army was right on his tail. They finally cornered him on April 26th in a tobacco barn. When he refused to come out, they just set the barn on fire and shot him.
But the true fallout, the real historical pivot, wasn't about Booth. It was about who came next. Lincoln's death made his vice president, Andrew Johnson, the new president. And this is where everything changes. Lincoln had planned for a merciful and speedy reconstruction to bring the South back into the Union with malice toward none.
Johnson, however, was a completely different animal. He fought constantly with Congress, he vetoed crucial civil rights laws, and he opposed the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship to formerly enslaved people. His actions basically sabotaged any early chance at racial equality, and they set the stage for a century of segregation and Jim Crow laws.
And here is a ripple effect I bet you never, ever considered. Before the Civil War, funerals were pretty simple. But the war created this new need to preserve soldiers' bodies for the long trip home. So a new technique, embalming, started to catch on. When Lincoln was killed, his Secretary of War decided the nation needed to see him one last time. So his embalmed body was taken on a 1,600-mile funeral train tour. Millions of people lined up to see their fallen president. And seeing him, looking so lifelike after so many days, it was mind-blowing to people at the time. It completely normalized embalming, turning it from a wartime necessity into a cultural tradition. Lincoln's death pretty much single-handedly created the modern, multi-billion-dollar American funeral industry we know today.
Okay, so from an assassination that created an entire industry, we now turn to one that created a shared global trauma. Because on November 22nd, 1963, the murder of President John F. Kennedy didn't unfold in history books. It unfolded in real time, on live television, beamed directly into the living rooms of a stunned and horrified world.
The speed of it all was just dizzying. At 12:30 p.m., shots rang out. 30 minutes later, the president was dead. By 2:38 p.m., just a couple hours later, Lyndon B. Johnson was being sworn in as president on Air Force One, standing next to a shell-shocked Jackie Kennedy. And then, just 2 days after that, the entire nation watched in total disbelief as the accused assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was himself murdered while being moved from jail on live television. It was just a relentless 4-day-long national trauma.
And right in the middle of all that chaos, one image was seared into the world's collective memory. It was Jackie Kennedy, still wearing the bright pink suit she had on when her husband was shot, now stained with his blood. Aides begged her to change, but she refused, saying those incredibly powerful words, "I want them to see what they have done to Jack." Her decision to just bear witness, to not hide the horror of it, made the tragedy real and unforgettable for every single person watching.
This was really the first major historical event to play out like this. Television turned it from a distant news report into this intimate, shared experience. For 4 straight days, the world was basically glued to their TV sets, watching the funeral, the grieving family, the eternal flame. It really marked a profound loss of innocence for America and gave birth to this era of cynicism and conspiracy theories that, let's be honest, is still with us today. An entire generation can tell you exactly where they were when they heard the news.
So from the fall of a republic, to the shattering of a nation's reconstruction, to the end of a generation's innocence, we're seeing a really clear pattern here, right? The initial act of violence, that's just the beginning of the story. The real legacy is written in all the years and decades that come after.
Let's just break this down side by side. For Caesar, the immediate result was a civil war, but the long-term legacy was a total transformation of Roman government into an empire. For Lincoln, the immediate result was a chaotic reconstruction, but the legacy was a century-long struggle for civil rights and, bizarrely, a brand new industry. And for Kennedy, the immediate result was global shock, but the lasting legacy was a loss of national innocence and a deep public distrust that lingers to this day.
So here's the bottom line: the bullet or the blade? That's just the catalyst. The real, lasting impact comes from the void that's left behind. It's in the laws that never get passed, the leaders who rise up to take their place, and the way an entire society has to change to try and make sense of something so senseless. History isn't a straight line. It's more like a fragile thread that can be snapped at any moment.
And it just leaves us with so many of these haunting questions. What if Caesar had listened to the warnings? What if Lincoln had lived to guide Reconstruction? What if Kennedy had finished his term? Of course, we can never know the answers, but looking at these moments reminds us just how powerfully a single day, a single violent act, can shape the world we're all living in right now. So which what if do you think is the most haunting? It's something to think about.